All right. So this is actually from the syllabus. I'm not going to read all of it. But it's the idea of identify the characteristics of addiction, develop an understanding of addictive and polyaddictive behavior. Now, polyaddiction is not addiction to parrots or addiction by parrots or addiction to plastic. It's many addictions operating at the same time. Okay? Any addictive process or substance engages the brain reward system. And we'll explain what that is, all right? So we want you to develop an understanding of the etiologies, that is, how things start, the purposes, meanings, and goals of addictive behavior. So that's another piece you need to understand. All addictive behavior has a goal. It's goal-oriented behavior. And there are powerful systems within our brain to achieve goals. You know what's deep about junkies? In Eugene or anywhere? What's deep about junkies is a junkie has to come up with $200 a day, every day for a year, which is minimum wage for a doctor. 60 grand without a job. Now, how would you do that if you wanted to do that? You find a way, and addiction is a powerful motivator to do that. So what happens if you can channel that creativity, if you will, into like legal health pursuing pursuits? It'd be amazing. All right, develop a cross-cultural understanding of the processes of prevention and recovery from addiction. Begin an awareness of how people, organizations, structure, policy, and practices promote addictions in society, and become familiar with prevention and treatment resources in Lane County. And become aware of and utilize culturally appropriate self-care technology. I think, from my personal bias, this is probably the most important aspect of the class. This is not something that people get trained to do in terms of looking at self-care. This is a major issue in terms of looking at, re-entry veterans and people re-entering from prison. They were in high-stress environments where they were not taught how to take care of themselves. Civilians are not oriented to take care of themselves. In the treatment professional world, self-care is supposed to be going to meetings. That's the extent of your self-care. Well, what about the other stuff? So great, we get you off street drugs and alcohol, but you become an overeating Prozac addict, and that's pro-social because somebody's making money from it? Oh, did I say that out loud? Okay, so I'm thinking that there's a better definition of health than that. So, required course text, Willpower is Not Enough by Washington and Boundy, Fourfold Way by Angie Arian. And this is a book that I've been writing, but I've just diffused it into the PowerPoints, which will be available within a day or so after the class delivery in both PowerPoint and in PDFs, too. So a few suggested readings talked about in the syllabus: Chocolate to Morphine and the Natural Mind by Andrew Weil. The Addictive Organization by Ann Wilson-Schaef and Diane Fassel. Work Addiction, Working Ourselves to Death. Your Money or Your Life by Dominguez and Robin. I think this is all in the syllabus, yes? Okay, all right. Class evaluation, in other words, your grade, based on a percentage of 270 total points, demonstrated understanding of the material through also midterm and final evaluations, which because of how the class is structured, i.e. there's a classroom presentation, and there's people online, and there's people in Cottage Grove, so the way I do midterms and finals is take home open book, because test taking is really bad television. And what? You're going to cheat? This is like your addiction. Or not, and your recovery. You're going to cheat on that? It's not about the grade. It's about making less work for me. I don't mind seeing you in my office, but I think if we reduce the number of addiction problems, that it's all to the good. So, required research and writing. So, 4 one-page, single-space, 12-point font type papers. Social recon, start week 1, due end of week 2. Weekly food mood diary, start week 3, due end of week 4. How I spent my week diary, start week 5, due end of week 6. Things that make me go, start week 7, due end of week 8. Additionally, it would be nice if you had eliminated or lessened the overall amount of addiction in your life, but that's not for me to evaluate. Can't be part of the class. So there are deadlines. Okay? These are the suggested deadlines. I am the drug counselor for this institution. I really don't have time to figure out whether you were 2 days late on a paper. It's up to you. So yes, there are guidelines for when you get this in. There's no penalty for late work. It's not because I'm being loose or lazy. Some of this stuff brings up stuff for people. The actual action is pretty simple, and I'll show you how that works. So broadly speaking, there are 2 addictive behaviors to watch out for, broadly speaking. So ingestive, things that you take into your body. Alcohol and other drugs and food. It's primarily what this category is. And process, things you do with your body. Polyaddictions, combinations of things you do with your body and things you take into your body. So there are, for example, with polyaddictions or even ingestive addictions, there are certain substances that are drugs, straight up. Now, if we use the original Aztec recipe for chocolate, okay, which is not really sugar, but peppers, okay? You don't necessarily gain weight on it. You do get the drug effects of it, which in chocolate, there are several different drugs going on. One's a stimulant, theobromine, I believe it is. There is also an anandamide, so like the same chemical that marijuana works on in chocolate. And in the female genome, in particular, chocolate acts like Prozac, or an SSRI, actually. It raises serotonin levels. Not just in women, but particularly in women, it works really well for that. Now, adding sugar, of course, there's another drug. Because some people aren't into hot peppers versus sugar. Well, there you go. Polyaddiction. So, take, for example, gambling in a casino. If you visited a casino, you notice there's no clocks and there's no windows. Food and booze are cheap. There's a reason for that. Video poker. Okay, same thing. Right? You probably have better luck in a real-time human-to-human poker game. Right? But you don't know that the machine is designed to take your money. Like I would say, I don't do gambling treatment in particular. I leave that to other people. But I'm saying, you gamble with money you have to throw away. You don't have money to throw away? Don't gamble. But if you're going gambling for the high, There's other ways to get the high than giving away money to people. If you want to do that, there's other, I have a bridge I can sell you. All right, so introduction to addictive behaviors. Addictive behaviors seem so familiar to me. I wonder why that is. Here's why that is and why addictions exist. Okay, as an experimental research project. Look up how aspartame or aspartame started out as an insecticide and became a sweetener. Check that out. You use Splenda or whatever the other, forms of that particular substance are. Aspartame started out as an insecticide and got repurposed as a sweetener. Look up the word excitotoxin. Okay? Some addictions are induced as part of maintaining profitability. So addictions exist because the brain is a pattern-making and pattern-recognizing device. Culture is the collection of patterns necessary for survival. So many addictions are the adaptations of patterns necessary for survival. They've just been changed, repurposed. That's why the focus in the class is looking at culture. You want to be able to hack your own culture. Okay? People may not necessarily, so for example, if you look at what we call in English stereotypical behavior, so who stereotypically are big drinkers?
College students.
College students. What else? Homeless people. What else?
Native Americans.
Native Americans. What else? Who else?
Businessmen.
Businessmen. Somebody said Irish. Okay. Irish and who else? Russians. Okay. Germans. Okay. So here's the thing. What happened to those folks? So that's the thing. I'm sorry, I'm biased. I'm a black Indian. We structure our reality by a detailed understanding of history. Okay? This shit didn't just start today or even a decade ago. So we go back to where it started. Okay? So, as an example, the Irish and Scots people lived in their native countries like Native Americans did here. And they had the same thing done to them by the English that English-speaking people did to the Native Americans before the English got here. So what happens when your sacred groves are burned? They kill your musicians. You are not allowed to speak your language. They kill you for speaking your language. Have you ever, and there are lots of interesting phrases in English that date back to that time that have been cut off from that history. So, for example, they read you the Riot Act, blackmail. So, blackmail is this. Mail was money. It's silver money. And Britain means land of the cows. So your wealth was based on how many cows you had. Okay? So the British, the English, would rustle the Scots cattle, and then they would have to buy their cattle back with the rent money. Mail, hence black mail. If they gathered to protest the taking of their cattle, if there are more than 3 of you gathered, that's a riot. And they read you the Riot Act, which you actually can't speak unless you're asked a question or you're recognized. So if you speak, they can arrest you or kill you. You gather more than 3 to protest, Riot Act, you're arrested. How do you think people are going to feel about that? And how are they going to medicate themselves? What if the cultural patterns before the English came that were set? So here's a rule that's still a rule in Ireland and Scotland that talks about the cultural use pattern. Okay, there's a reason why I'm this isn't a diversion. I'm looking letting you look at the history. So you look at the history. So still a rule in Ireland and Scotland today. Whiskey, this is the Gaelic word, whiskey, okay, which is anglicized into whiskey, is made from what? Grain, rye, all right? So here's the rule. No one makes whiskey until everybody has bread first. Who would make a rule like that, men or women? Okay, so the wise women, okay, who basically controlled the drug technology said, okay, nobody gets whiskey until everybody has bread first. What happens when you decide, oh, you guys are witches? Okay, and we're going to burn you at the stake. What happens to the prevention in that culture? It's gone. So here's what happens when those folks come to Turtle Island. Native Americans, the only people who had alcohol technology in Indian country were people who had agriculture, because that's where alcohol technology comes from. They didn't have distilled spirits. And basically the way they treated alcohol, so we're talking about elderberry wine and stuff like that. Aztecs had corn beer, all right? Kids don't drink. Pregnant women don't drink. Native Americans knew 4,000 years ago that alcohol harmed the fetus and pregnant women. We didn't invent the concept of fetal alcohol syndrome in this country till 1978. The Puritans, you know, the Puritan ethic. The Puritans gave rum to 4-year-olds in the 1600s. What happens when you start a kid at 4 years old on a shot or more of rum? They become addicted. But they didn't have a concept of addiction back then. In fact, we didn't even have a concept of alcohol addiction, or alcohol was a disease until 1956. So you see the problem here, right? Cultural destruction causes substance abuse to go up. And I'm talking about Europeans, so y'all got a culture. You weren't all addicted before coming here, okay? But somehow we've gotten away from those roots. That's why we pay attention to culture, all right? So many addictions are adaptations of patterns necessary for survival. So prayer, or the relationship to the rest of the universe. So for example, among the Lakota, I don't know how many of you, even though we're a smoke-free campus, some of you worship the tobacco god, right? In the culture that gave us tobacco, the gift of the sacred pipe, White Buffalo woman came to the Lakota and gave them the sacred pipe. Tobacco was one of 800 plus natural plants natives used for prayer and healing. Tobacco was actually the name for a pipe, not the herb. But the idea was this: you don't inhale. You don't smoke it as a pregnant woman. You don't smoke it as a kid. You only use it for prayer, and you don't inhale, and you only pray to welcome somebody else. You certainly ain't praying several times an hour. Though every puff is bringing you closer to God, so I don't know. All right, so 80 of those 800 are in use today, including, for example, aspirin, digitalis, Vaseline, a host of others. So, used as intended in the original culture, tobacco is only for prayer, not inhaled, therefore non-addictive and non-cancer producing. So, once or twice a day, not several times an hour. So, same thing with the little smoke, also known by its Spanish names, marijuana, used only by medicine people to seek vision. For others, not personal entertainment. That's among the Lakota. 2.